research you at the National Poetry Library, looking at what they had, I realised that, you know, this would be 3 visits for me. I could not possibly do it in just, you know, a 4-hour visit, really. So I can see your latest collection.
Yes, this is the latest one, First Rain in Paradise.
Yes.
And, you know, it's odd. You start off thinking, I don't know, it's really amazing how if you keep working steadily, the books mount up. Mm-hmm. I suppose my first 3 books have been collected into one, which is Chaotic Angels. Yes. So that's it's not really a selected, it's a kind of just the first 3 books.
Yes, yeah.
And then after that came, I think, A Hospital Odyssey, which was long, I mean thousands of lines long, yes. And with a lovely cover by Leonora Carrington. And then after that I went small and started writing smaller and smaller yes. poems, that trend has continued. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. It's as if I shot my bolt with a very long poem.
Right, yes.
And then I also brought along, just in case, this is my first 3 collections in Welsh. Lovely. In one book.
Yes.
And then the subsequent Treiglo, which is about my father. And then that's the Nightshade Mother, the prose book, the recent one. That's my yes. 3rd non-fiction book.
Shmai, Gwyneth.
Hello.
It is such a pleasure to be able to talk to you about your poetry and your writing.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I'm really grateful.
It's my pleasure. I have a few questions for you, and the first of those is, how did poetry begin for you?
Well, it came out of the blue, but, you know, I felt fully passionate about it right from the word go. I think I was about 7 and suddenly decided to write a long poem about the rain in one Easter holiday in rhyming stanzas, and since then I could never find anything that I thought was half as interesting as just playing with words and seeing what you could find out about what you feel about things through words, you know. So it was like a thunderclap, really. I don't know where it came from or why, but you know, I'm in my 60s now and still thinking, how do people cope who don't have this obsession and drive to make poems? I don't, you know, I feel very lucky to have it. Even though it doesn't make, you know, the life of a poet doesn't make for a very easy, straightforward yes. life, as you know yourself. Yes. But it's also, I mean, the gift in it is amazing. I mean, I'll read the opening poem of the new collection. It's from a collection of poems called Spiderings, and it starts off imagining a domestic situation which is very disturbing. I used to be arachnophobic, so I was thinking, right, seeing as I'm now facing the most difficult problem I've had in my life so far, I might as well just put to face all the fear at the same time. So this is really a description of what it's like to be in an abusive home. Spider Mother. In that top corner, my torch picks out the 8 red eyes of one cunning spider, wedged like a camera in its nest of wires. I am the mote in each eye. Her gazes trap me like weighted nets which have floored me more times than I care to admit. Once I'm felled, Down she abseils and crawls, tickling inside my ear to lay eggs into my brain. Those cells adjust to their guest with seasons of migraine through which I rest until she emerges triumphant through the arch of my mouth, clad in chainmail of living armour, glittering spiderlings hatched from my mind, if that can be called my own now or home.
Your 2010 Blood Axe published A Hospital Odyssey has been described as a modern epic. Doctor Who meets Paradise Lost, with a long poem asking what is health and what it is like to care for someone. I wanted to ask you how this collection came about.
Oh my goodness, well, it's a very long story, but my husband and I had learned to sail on our own boats in Cardiff. We learned to sail out there in
Right,
Cardiff Bay,
yes.
on a tiny boat called Nitro.
Right.
And I remember going aground just over there, you know, just a normal thing.
Yes.
So we made all the mistakes, and then we gradually became more competent sailors and decided that we would like to sail around the world, because my husband had been in the Merchant Navy when he was younger.
Right.
And I'd always been interested in the sea. So we reached North Africa,
Wow.
where my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a complete surprise. I had no idea that he was ill. So we had to come home at short notice, and he had to go through a course of chemotherapy. And I think as part of as a coping mechanism, I thought, well, I had assumed I would be writing a long sea voyage poem, and that wasn't going to happen. So I thought, well, why don't I just notice what I'm noticing about hospitals and make that into my voyage? So really, the boat morphed into the hospital.
Right.
And in fact, once you start looking at a hospital, it does look like an ocean liner,
Yes.
particularly if you're there in the middle of the night and, you know, skeleton staff and
Yes.
so on and so forth. So this really became a displacement activity for severe anxiety, concern, and it was as if it was reimagining it as vividly as possible was the best way I could find of bearing what was happening, because it was, again, you know, it was not what anybody wants to happen.
Yes.
So luckily we came through it, and my husband's still in recovery, but it was an epic journey to not only to make the voyage in an actual boat, but, you know, our experience in the hospital, even more so.
Yes.
And I thought it called for the archetypes and extreme situations of the epic. And I'd long been an admirer of Milton. I mean, I'm a fan of epics. I really like them. That kind of action. It's quite different from any other poetic form.
Yes.
So it was really a way of coping. So I would write one canto every month to coincide with my husband's latest chemo cycle. That we kind of fell into that rhythm. And so far we're both still well. I've had a period of illness with severe, about a decade of really severe migraine. And so I've got a sequence about migraine, but I'll read a book, a poem which was originally in Welsh. I'm sorry, didn't bring the copy with me. But this is the translation. Another day ill in bed. I've been slain like hay in the second cut and laid on my bed. 2 fields away, the illness machine roars murder. I hear my mind's creatures whisper, buzzard and crow turn overhead already. Run for God's sake, while you can, for the hedge's shelter. In a moment, a tractor will return with the baler to start in earnest on the harvest.
Your 2011 collection, Sparrow Tree, explores birds as mouthpieces for inhuman song and the wild inside the mind. This collection also has the stunning area of poems under the section heading, How to Knit a Poem. What is it about bird song that moves so many poets?
I think, because birds seem to be singing, and they do sing, they call and they sing, it is a truism that birds are kind of stand-in for poets, in that, you know, they fly in the imagination, you know, poets fly in the imagination, and birds' song then is abstract music. We do understand the calls, and we know a lot about bird song, the different calls and what they mean. For example, the chaffinch's rain call, that's a very specific one. But I think it's about that overlap between what's human and what is inhuman. And that fascinates me because birds are an example of what does not bow to our will, and that's why they're so delightful. And I mean, I can think of very few things that I like better than looking at birds.
Yes.
I mean, they're a big part of my life. I remember meeting a person I didn't know in a nature reserve near where I live in Cardiff, and we were looking at long-tailed tits in a bush, and we both agreed that neither of us would want to carry on living if these birds disappear. You know,
Absolutely.
But I just think they are, to my mind, a way of endlessly thinking about language and music. They still fascinate me, and I'm still writing about birds, and long may it last. This poem is from a llofrudd iaith, and it's about what happens to birds when the words describing them have gone. Dechrau'r anghofio. Heddiw trodd y sigildigwt yn wagtail. Gwyliais yn ofalus wrth I wasg ynant, symud papurau newyddion y dydd, I lawr o'r mynyddoedd yw rhwygon rhac symheiriant y pentref. Ni hidi ar wagtail, roedd yn hunan gytun fel o'r blaen ac yn moes ymgrymu'n ddofn i'r golau a'r cerrig. Doedd ddim I weld yn aderyn mwy chwym, bod ganddo lai o gytseiniaid i'w cario. Gwichiodd swallows Sir Aberteifi uwch fy mhen, ei hedenydd fel corkscrew, yn agor gwyn rhywiol yn osaweth. Mae ei cri yn rhan annatod o'm hennau di, sŵn I hoen, yn ddyfnach nag ieithwedd, neu ddistawrwydd, neu boen. And here's the translation, the English translation of it. Slightly different, I have to say, it's a different form. What's in a name? Today the wagtail finally forgot that I once called it sigildigwt. It didn't give a tinker's toss, kept right on rooting in river moss, no longer musical. Relieved perhaps that someone would be noticing less about its habits. Magpie's fear of men lessened as we'd lost one means, the word pioden, of keeping track of terrorist birds out in the back. Lleian Wen is not the same as smew, because it's another point of view, another bird. There's been a cull, Gwylan's gone, and we're left with gull, and blunter senses till that day when swallows, like Gwyneth, might stay away.
You've been called Wales's bilingual virtuoso. Your 2003 collection, Keeping Mum, was a Poetry Book Society recommendation. I read that the book originally started as a translation of your previous Welsh book.
Llofrudd Iaith.
Okay, thank you. The Language Murderer, I think, is the English
Yeah.
translation. How did these poems come to find a life of their own in English?
Well, I thought I should try and translate my own poems. I had fallen into a pattern of publishing first a Welsh language book, then an English language book, and that happened for a number of years. And with the Llofrudd Iaith, I thought, oh, well, I better try and translate it. But I discovered an interesting thing, that somehow when you're trying to describe the situation of being in a minority language that's under threat to a majority language audience, the situation doesn't transfer adequately. So I thought, rather than doing a literal translation of changing what was a detective story in the Welsh, a Llofrudd Iaith, the language murderer, into a detective story in English, that I would put it in a situation which an English language audience might understand a bit more about the fragility that you feel in terms of identity, psychologically, when your culture is in danger of just going down the drain, and you know, like being washed down the drain like sand. And I thought that mental illness was probably a good parallel. And Nuala Ny Domhnall's writing in Gaelic was very helpful in getting me to see that connection between minority, the pressures of being in a linguistic minority, and mental distress. So there was that. So I just developed another plot and had a doctor as a psychiatrist as the detective rather than the detective. You know, there is a way in which when I've written a Welsh poem, that's a complete experience in itself. If I finished it and published it, I actually it bores me a bit to completely redo it. So I would rather adapt and feel out the grain of where the English poem wants to go.
Yes.
So perhaps I have a low boredom threshold.
Right.
Will I? The herb called "Will I ever feel better" is to be used only to treat the gravest wounds that must, despite the patient's protests, be kept open so they can heal from the inside out. Summer comes, summer goes. So little recovery. Being alive is both trauma and sovereign remedy. You cannot choose.
You were the first national poet of Wales as the role came to be known. I'd love to know how the cultural experiences accumulated in this role impacted your journey as a writer.
Oh, that's a very good question. I would see it the other way round.
Right.
That I feel, because of my background as a Welsh speaker, I was already very familiar with the concept of public poetry. So I come from a culture where if a child is born, you write them a poem. If somebody gets married, you write them a poem. So the idea of self-commissioning, of social commissioning of poetry is completely normal. So I think I brought that to the role. But I don't think that the role particularly had any influence whatsoever. In some ways, it was a diversion because I discovered that the public poetry that I wrote, even though I did my best to make these good poems, they didn't fall naturally into a subsequent collection. It was as if they were slightly to one side of the river of my imagination. So I think it's the reverse of what you suggested.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I asked the question was because I remember reading that being the Poet Laureate had an adverse impact on Andrew Motion as a poet, but I know that Simon Armitage has published collections during his tenure, so I just thought, there must be some sort of a burden, and so...
I think that's very interesting because Simon Armitage has been remarkable in his ability to continue publishing his own poems, private poems to do with the death of his father, as well as more public poems. He seems to I think every poet has a different economy of energy and privacy inside, and I think maybe Andrew Motion had a harder time with the self-consciousness because those poems are so public that any perceived failure is punished. I mean, it's pretty brutal.
Yes.
But of course, they both did the work for the English Poet Laureateship was for 10 years.
Yes.
When I started out, it was initially for a year to be renewed. So I did it only for a year,
yes.
so there wasn't long enough, really.
Yes.
But I do think that you have to have pretty strong nerves
Yes.
to withstand the thought that very private poems are being mocked publicly. But I do think that Simon Armitage has done an amazing job. Yes. This poem is based on a book called Rogue Mail, where I think it's Geoffrey Household, isn't it? Right. Have you read the book?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an amazing book where a man goes to ground in an old hollow way. But this is my version of it. Rogue female. It's me or you. I have prepared with tireless discipline and feats of the bladder unusual in women for your approach. Right now, a catapult with a fountain pen bolt is trained on your eye, which I see from your fear is a distinctive green. This nib, filed fine, will enter your brain. If you haven't been hunting me, you won't be hurt by my words. Move slowly now. Much depends on your answer. So this is, me imagining being gone to ground, and all I've got is a fountain pen, which is pretty much what it's like being a writer.
With the cursory reference to your 2024 memoir, Nightshade Mother, published by University of Wales Press, Disentangling, and your 2025 Blood Axe poetry collection, First Rain in Paradise, I wanted to ask about the difficulties and rewards of writing about deeply personal and often traumatic relationships a writer has to undergo.
Yes, I mean, both these books that you mention are about very, very difficult, a very difficult relationship with my mother, which caused me enormous pain and damage since early childhood. And with that kind of damage, it doesn't disappear. You mitigate it and you work hard to to make the changes that you can, but not everything is possible.
Yes.
I would have been very surprised actually if I had been looking from the beginning of my career at this point, I would have not have predicted that I would be as open about personal matters, because I started off as a very impersonal type of writer, except of course that your inner configuration is there anyway. It's in code.
Yes.
So I think those patterns of emotion, of delight and horror have always been there, just more under the surface. Unfortunate. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, it's a difficult subject, you see. I think, however, that as you grow older, you have to I felt that I have had to confront fully the experience, and that can't be done in code. In fact, it's essential that you stop gaslighting yourself.
Yes.
And that has been a very difficult confrontation for me, because it's made me fully face the grief of what I didn't have as a child, the hurt of the way my mother treated me, which was I can't even describe it quickly, but the rage and aggression towards me as a child was completely formative. On the other hand, having said that, it's difficult to face, the benefits of doing so are huge, and it's been extremely liberating in terms of poetry, because I feel now I'm not afraid of anything. And it's made me less inhibited creatively. So the payoff has been worth it, I think.
Right. I seem to recall you saying, this was at the interview of the book launch at Waterstones with Claire Potter. I think you said that you had to sort of put together a language that you could utilise to write about these experiences. So I guess this element, you said that this almost catharsis perhaps has opened up new possibilities.
Well, I think it has, and I think it is writing these two books, because the Nightshade Mother is a description of what happened to me in our family, and then First Rain in Paradise is actually starting with the kind of gothic fear of what happened, but also being determined not to stay in the shame of that, and asking how can you move through such a catastrophe and not be limited to it. So I hope, I really feel that the trajectory was out of trauma. That seems to me very important.
You translated the Book of Taliesin in 2019 with Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Wales and Canterbury, for Penguin Classics. What is it about the poetry and cultural significance of Taliesin that continues to inspire and enthrall generations?
Well, I know what inspires and enthralls me. It's the collective nature of Taliesin. I mean, Taliesin is not one. The poems in the Book of Taliesin are not the work of one poet. There is a heroic poet of the 8th or 9th century who was the bard of Urien, Rheged, and they are one distinct, and they are very good. But then there's a body of medieval poets who all used the name Taliesin. It's as if you and I would use Shakespeare as a mouthpiece. But the body of medieval work is really extraordinary in the sense that it's shamanistic, it's about shape-shifting, it's making huge claims about God, nature, the nature of poetry. And I think it's the fact that poetry is central to the Taliesin poets' imagination. And we couldn't believe when we discovered that nobody had translated it for a century as a book.
Yes.
So it was immensely difficult textually, because the meaning of much of the poetry is obscure, and that's even with the going being good. But I feel very satisfied that the work is done, translated in a kind of accessible, modern way that can give access to people to this very, very strange body of work. It's quite unique.
Yes.
I always make a collection with a shape. So then I start moving out into the world again from being, ill in bed. And this is a sequence about being expelled from paradise. This is the final poem. Expulsion, back to the birds. To blackbirds, the ancient privilege of bringing down day, calling alarm. Leave feeders, huddle together in roosts, hide. Photon by photon, earth turns away from her source. The kingfisher skies flayed bloody. Dark's coming. An owl descends, clutching stars and dismay in her talons. Stubborn as ever, I choose to stay.
Finally, who are the poets to have inspired your own writing journey from the past and present? You've already mentioned John Milton. And with reference to Wales in the 21st century, what encourages you about the feature of writing from Wales?
Gosh, well, I'm learning from poetry all the time. I mean, I read a lot. I read contemporary poets, very recent poets, because you can't afford to lose touch with what people are doing with the art form. And in terms of, I don't want to, there are so many poets. It seems to me that we are living in an absolutely extraordinary period of democratization of poetry, and that the form has, with the crossover between performance poetry and written poetry, that there's been a tremendous explosion of energy. There's so much amazing work being done that I can't even begin to name names. But I think the distinctive contribution of Wales is, when I'm thinking of the Welsh tradition, I'm reading Henry Vaughan, I'm reading Edward Thomas. I consider him a Welsh poet, not an English poet. Yes. He's a Welsh poet. David Jones. There's a people tend to think of, there's English poetry and Welsh poetry. No, there's a fertile cross-fertilization constantly. So David Jones is a Welsh poet. But also my interest has been, because I spent about 5 years in America, I read a lot of American poetry. Right. Yeah. So that's been fundamental in the sense that I think what the kind of poetry I like is easy with the speaking voice, and it takes as its basis how people speak, but turns that into a tool with which we can think really hard, rather than using language to dull our senses. And all the poetry that I like best has that sharpness without alienating people. But it needs to be thinking, and that's very important to me. I mean, I think there's a place for emotion as well. It's crucial because that's tied to the musical heritage of poetry. But that's the kind of flavour of poetry that I like. And there are so many. In fact, you know, even bad poets teach me things.
Yes.
You know, it's always worth reading.
Great. Well, Diolch, thank you so
Croeso.
much for talking to me.
Very, very, very much my pleasure.
Thank you, I'm honoured.